wondering, is her hair even more of a mess each time she films a new video? The answer is yes. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Rock'n'Beers, and today I want to talk to you about all the books I read in January. January was a strange month, period. Bad things happened, good things happened, and my reading was erratic at best. I did, for the most part, stick to the books I was intending to read, so that was good, but yeah, it wasn't an extremely successful month, and reading-wise, both in quantity and quality. However, I did read some amazing things. So let's start by mentioning the 3 books I read for Invisible Cities. In the end, instead of Little Eyes, I ended up reading Mouthful of Birds by Samantha Schweblin, just because we had to move the podcast recording for Little Eyes to February. These are short stories. I liked some more than others, and you can hear my thoughts more in depth in my Invisible Cities wrap-up. This was for Argentina. Then for Morocco, I read Tahar Benjalon's Frightening Islam. I'm not sure this is translated into English. I believe not. This is basically a book-length essay on people's perceptions about Islam. I enjoyed some aspects of it. Overall, I found it a bit shallow for such a serious topic. I thought I could read an online article that had basically the same information. And then I finally read If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura, and I just hated this novel so much. I thought it was really badly written. It's just, ugh. Okay, and then to continue the ugh, there was one DNF. You guys did me dirty. I'm joking, of course. But also, if you've read this book and you didn't tell me how awful it was, I'm a bit offended, because it's been so long since a book has produced physical discomfort in my body. It was awful. That's why I DNF'd it. But at the beginning, I couldn't DNF it because this book was Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami, translated by Philip Gabriel, I think. Yes, okay, by Philip Gabriel. I hated this book not only in the way it was written, but in its content. But the most important part is that the way it was written, I thought it was slow, dumb. The dialogue, it's some of the worst dialogues I've ever read in a serious novel. The characters, cardboards. And I'm even more upset because this was the book I was supposed to enjoy. I got halfway through it, so I did read over 200 pages of this. Luckily for me, Danny, who co-hosts the podcast in Spanish, also was hating it. And so when I suggested we just read it halfway and talk about our DNF in that podcast, link down below if you do understand Spanish, she said, yes, let's do that please, because this put us in a reading slump, because we are not slumpy readers. We think, if you want to read, you just must make time to read. But the problem when you have to read a book you don't like is that you shouldn't be reading anything else. You need to be making progress in this, but because this is such a terrible slog, you don't want to, and so you refuse to go, and it creates a vicious cycle where you're not reading. Ugh. Okay, so what is this about? It's about Kafka. He's 15, I think, and his John Green levels of special. He likes books, and then he gets introduced to music. And so you see, I love pretentious teenagers. I love reading about them if it's well done. But and then he goes to this town, and there is this librarian. Is he the librarian? Or no, he's an antique seller, Nakata, and it has been through stuff. And even very early on, a lot of people are very confused about this, but in favor of the podcast, after we DNF'd it, I did search for the ending, and I didn't find it surprising at all. I was like, okay, yeah, that seems where this was going. Yeah, there is magical realism, but talking cats don't make a novel magical realism, by the way, but also don't make it good. And even the talking cats were boring. So this was boring. It was also offensive, like so offensive. Regarding women, regarding, let's call it non-binary people. I don't even know what Murakami was doing there. And so, I actually sold this book and the cat book that I mentioned. So 2 bad cat books. in 1 month, both Japanese. I'm so angry at Japanese literature. No, you know what I'm angry about? And I'm sorry about this rant, but I know you'll be entertained, so I'm not going to cut it that much. Is that I love Japanese literature and I have so many choices. Why this month? Both of them. Plus, I was going through some really tough times, and so it was even worse. It was like my one true love, literature, my one support was betraying me. This just made me upset at how bad it was. I know it's not that acceptable to say, but I don't really mind reading about offensive things. I might criticize it, but I wouldn't have minded if this was better written, but it wasn't. And I've read Norwegian Wood. I thought that was okay, although if I reread it now, I don't know what I think. I read some short stories, fine. I love Murakami's nonfiction. I love it. And I do own the Wind Up Bird Chronicles, which will be my last Murakami novel attempt. If I don't like that, I'm probably reading one short story collection that I already own, and then that's it with his fiction, because this was so bad. Okay, we'll finish with the best, so this ends up on a high note. By the way, I just checked how long I've been recording for, and it's ridiculous. That Murakami run took a lot. I'm sorry if I didn't explain the plot extremely well. I hope I made my feelings clear on what I disliked. Yeah. 2 books I did like, but I felt not conflicted. It's not conflicted. It's not lukewarm because I liked them. It's just that I have thoughts, which is why I make these videos. The first is Ocean of Sound by David Toop, Ambient Sound and Radical Listening in the Age of Communication. This is my first music book of the year, I think. And it is a very, not experimental book, but a very personal book. And the author explains the purpose, or more than the purpose, his personal approach, which is basically a field note book, which is very well edited, of the author traveling to all these places and meeting all these musicians and reflecting upon what ambient music is and is for, and where is it going. And I liked it, but I think I personally overestimated how interested I would be to read about ambient music in such a haphazard way. I am not a big ambient music person. When he started talking about specific bands instead of the philosophy behind it, you know what I mean? When he talked about different artists and the specific records, I was like, okay, yeah. But when he started talking about more general stuff, plus his main argument or his main thesis is that starting with the French experimental composers of the turn of the century, thinking Ravel, Debussy, Satie, that sort of thing, you can trace like a direct line to now Muzak and ambient music and a lot of synth stuff and electronic stuff. And he also talks about sound art, which I did enjoy. The book wasn't entirely for me, but the reflections, when it got more broad in its scope and when he talked about what sampling is and where music was going, this was written in the 90s, I think, that he could sort of foresee where music was going, and it's just genius that way. I highlighted a lot of things. I enjoyed it. I'm definitely rereading certain parts of it. If you are very passionate about ambient music, you have to check this out. This is a classic of music writing, but be aware that it's very 90s in its structure. Oh, you can't really tell here, but it has chapter names like Content in a Void, and then the subtitle is Michael Mann and Tangerine Dream, Frank Sinatra, Dead Zone Recordings, Alice Coltrane, Roland Kirk, Jimi Hendrix, Dub, Brian Eno, James Brown, and it's not ordered at all. And then you see the sub chapters and they are like Dream, Content in a Void, Radio Reception, Under My Skin, Aqua. It's very, the effect you get while listening to that type of music. I am not that into the genre, but since it was a really cool, interesting book, I still got into it. Then I read Colson Whitehead's The Colossus of New York, which is a collection of essays, sort of. They are not really essays, they are more like vignettes. It's a bit like Sous Chef, which was one of my best nonfiction books of 2020. I will link that video down below so you can check that out, where it's you and it tries to put you, the reader, in these vignettes, and so it's a bit like you're experiencing them. And I enjoyed it. Unlike Sous Chef, I think this one got old a bit fast. It's my first Colson Whitehead, and I definitely want to read more. I think the first one, which was an actual essay, was my favorite because it was so insightful. I thought this is fun, but I don't know, it's just, I was expecting essays, especially because the first one is more of an essay, and I didn't get that. I think it's trying to make the arguments through the vignettes, and I think that works. I think he's very clever about that. He has a knack clearly for setting these scenes, and if you know New York and you like New York, you'll say, okay, yeah, that's very New York. But if you're expecting essays, it is very disappointing, especially because the first one is an essay and it's so good and you want more of that. So I think if you're in the mood for some travel writing, maybe this is more for you. Then I read All the Sad Young Men by F. Scott Fitzgerald. In case you don't follow me on Bookstagram, you should. Actually, I don't post very often, but I upload some stories, so, you know, link down below to that. Anyways, I got a box set. It's not really a box set. They were selling 10 F. Scott Fitzgerald books of your choice. So I basically stocked up, and now I'm only one book short of owning all the Fitzgerald books ever, and that makes me so happy. And I started with All the Sad Young Men because I was in the mood to reread The Great Gatsby, but I thought I should read something new. And these were written close to The Great Gatsby and deal with similar topics. They are also so clever. I think some of the best stories are here. I really enjoyed it. I think if you don't know where to go next after The Great Gatsby and you want to read something similar, not necessarily complete Fitzgerald's major works, I think you should go to this. I think this is a testament of how good his short stories were. So some examples of the stories you can find here is The Rich Boy, Winter Dreams, Baby Party, Absolution, The Sensible Thing, Gretchen's 40 Wings. It's very good. The writing, the characters, the stories are on the longer side and they work so well. He has a really good sense of pacing. I think Fitzgerald worked best in condensed spaces. Themes, of course, include money, class, and love, but the dark side of it, what happens when we're used to it and then we don't get it, or we aspire to it and our dreams are thwarted, all wrapped up in Fitzgerald's beautiful prose. So yeah, I really recommend this one. I really enjoyed it. Also, how beautiful are these Alma Classic editions? A book that I picked up while I was trying to avoid reading Kafka on the Shore because I needed to remind myself that reading is so fun. Otherwise I was going to crack. So this is Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, and it's my last Gillian Flynn that I had to read. I've read all of the others. This sadly is my least favorite by her, but I still really enjoyed it. It's just that I think Gone Girl is a masterpiece, and my personal favorite, Sharp Objects, I just love so much. So in comparison, this didn't live up to that, but it's still really great. Gillian Flynn is so smart. She writes so well. It's simple, believable, straightforward in a way, but also so layered. And she has a point. You know she's trying to say something. She doesn't hit you over the head with it, but all her scenes and all the contexts are made to make you think. And it's not extremely obscure, it's not hard to analyze, but it's so rewarding. She deserves all the praise she gets, and I hope we get more from her soon. Okay, so this is about Libby. She is the survivor of a multiple murder that occurred that supposedly was perpetrated by her brother Ben, and she's basically just nobody when the book starts. She doesn't have a life really, and then because she needs money, she meets these people who are like true crime enthusiasts, and it's interesting that Gillian Flynn in that way predicted or perhaps inspired the true crime craze that we are now finding ourselves in, which, not gonna lie, not extremely fond of. I like some true crime, but I'm not as obsessed with it as everybody seems to be, and So she starts working with them because they pay her and they believe that Ben is innocent, and she starts digging, and that's the story. And it's told in two timelines. One is her in the present and the other is a split timeline, one perspective with the mother, Patricia I think, and the other with the brother Ben, and we see what he was up to back then. And as always with Gillian Flynn, it has a lot of plot twists, a very strong gender perspective, and if having done something or not having done something sort of colors everything else that you've done. So it's really good. It's really pacey. I read this in like 2 days. It is big because it's a mass market paperback, but it has like big spacing and the pages are not really fully used, so it's not that long. It's really good. I just really recommend it. It's not my favorite Gillian Flynn, but it's really, really good. I also read Feminine Gospels by Carol Ann Duffy. This is a collection of poetry. It made me realize that Carol Ann Duffy is indeed one of my favorite poets of all time. She is brilliant and hilarious and has a thing with imagery that is so powerful and so good. She does free verse, but she also plays with structure and does so well. In this one, what she does most and she does best is talking about female archetypes in history and how those have affected and still continue to affect us. What is so clever is that sometimes she won't even say who she's referring to, so you'll just read the poem at face value and then something will tip it off and you'll say, oh, okay. Not all the poems are like that. Some others are just poems about being a woman and the female experience, but in any case, it's very insightful. Some of the poems I was really upset by in a good way. Some others I just loved and reread actually quite a lot of times. If you like more traditional poetry, and especially if you like, I don't even know how to describe this, but perhaps if you like romantic poetry but are tired of reading about men or about women through men's eyes, this is a good alternative. It's not romantic in its conception. It's not as elaborate, and actually quite a few of the poems are quite simple in language, but it has that flavor of intertextuality, of playing with archetypes, of using form, and very, very strong imagery and sound. So it's so good, really. It's just, ugh. I also read Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, and this was the best novel I read all month. I buddy read this with Amelia from Amelia Reads and deeply enjoyed it. She's such an interesting person, and so we have great discussions on the books. This is about a historian called Claudia. She's on her deathbed and we follow her through her reminiscing her own life. It's told in two perspectives that shift without much announcement, and one is first person perspective and the other is a really close third. But the question remains of whether this third is Claudia historicizing her own life or it's an authorial voice, which tints the whole novel with a color of unreliability, because it's also dealing with history and language and the differences between how one person perceives one thing and the other person perceives the same event. The relationships in here are really engrossing, interesting. The mother-daughter relationship in particular. It's also crazy to think that this book was published in the 80s because it's so daring. It's not experimental in the way that we would now call experimental, doing crazy things with structure or whatever, but it is very unconventional. I don't think I've ever read anything quite like it. And the fact that it has such an unlikable protagonist, but it allows us to see her vulnerabilities as well, and she still remains interesting, and she's not apologizing for her being not a bad person but a selfish person, and how that makes her feel because she's a woman and was raised in a way to be a wife, but because of her brother and the very interesting relationship they had, she was always pushing herself to be more like him. This won the Man Booker at some point of life. It's so good and I really recommend it. I almost forgot to tell you about this book because I read it in ebook form, but I read How to Be an Artist by Jerry Saltz. This is a wonderful booklet. I presume it must be very small in person, but I wouldn't know. It's a series of steps, and when I mean series, I do mean series. It's about 100, I think, or 60, but it's more than 50, I'll tell you that, about how to be an artist. And it talks about the work, about selling the work, about creativity. It's so good. I think a lot of people are not going to get that much out of it because he's speaking, well, mainly to visual artists. It does have exercises, and most of them are draw this or try to create that. So, it might not be your necessarily area of expertise. It's not mine either. But I think what he proposes can be extrapolated to other areas. In my case, it was so nice to read. I also think some older people might not feel it's so revolutionary because it is a very straightforward but honest book. And it is, I guess, self-helpy in the way that it's trying to help you, but it's not self-helpy in tone. It's not trying to offer magic remedies. It can be summarized as in get to work, nothing else matters, just get to work. It will never be a good time, it will never be safe, it will never be perfect, just do it. And a lot of people that have their lives a bit more put together or figured out might dismiss this. But as someone who doesn't, I think it was very motivating. It was very funny also and illuminating. He speaks from his own experience, and that's always valuable. He was a truck driver until he was 40 after having dropped out of art school, and then he decided to become a critic. I should have started with that because he is an art critic at New York Magazine. So it's just such a great book. It's not for everyone, but if you like Show Your Work by Kleon, which is a book I thought was just alright, I think this is the good version of that. The writing is great, insightful, concise, sharp, witty, and the exercises are helpful, and the art that is featured is really cool. All things very different. So I really recommend this one if that sounds like something that will enrich your life. We'll finish off on a reread. This is My Tender Matador by Pedro Lemebel. This is the edition in Spanish. I reread it and I loved it. If I'm not mistaken, the English version is translated by Katherine Silver. There is so much Chilean slang here, but not just that. It's just that some of it is not even proper slang in the way that you would find in a Chilean language dictionary. They are ways in which certain areas of the population, me included, used to deform words and transform them into something else. It's very hard to explain. I'm sure there are things like that in English, but nothing that I can think of in the same way that it's used here in this book. It is a hard book to read, and I haven't described what it's about. It's about the Queen of the Corner, who is a gay man in his 40s during the dictatorship here in Chile, which was the 80s. And he meets this young college student, Carlos, who is doing some suspicious activities. They become friends. He starts leaving boxes at the Queen's house. And the implication from the beginning is that he is part of the armed movement that planned to kill the dictator, and that didn't work. That's sort of underlying the whole narrative, but it's never directly addressed. Those chapters, narrated in a close third with the Queen of the Corner, are interspersed with hilarious chapters in the close third of the dictator, who is listening to his wife complain, and it's such clever satire. Oh, it's so good. The way it talks about masculinity and desire and love, because Carlos and the Queen of the Corner strike a friendship that borders on love. And it seems like Carlos could be in love the same way, but it's never really there. But maybe yes, but then there is this whole age difference and sexuality issue and the dictatorship, just plain and simple. It's just so fascinating. The writing is so good, and my heart aches, but it also is really full. This was a January pick for Reading Latinas, which is my friend's book club. I will link my video explaining everything down below, and also the Instagram, so you can check that out, because she does have a discussion post up, and some people, me included, have commented on that. But what I think is amazing is that within this time that was so brutal and there was so much suffering, Pedro Lemebel manages to find the tenderness. That's why I think My Tender Matador is such a good translation, even though it's not the same as Tengo Miedo Torero, which literally translates to I am afraid Toreador or Matador, whatever. It's not quite the same, but I think highlighting the tenderness is important because there is a lot of violence, because these were very violent times that we're still working our way through as a country. This relationship between the Queen of the Corner and Carlos is so tender, even if it's so charged, even if they are so jaded by their circumstances. The way they find solace in each other is very tender. Therefore, I think highlighting that is so important, and the prose is so beautiful. Give it a shot. There's also a movie that you can see that is not the best movie ever created, but it's so soft and wonderful. It really highlights the contrast between the violence and the tenderness I'm referring to. So just give it a shot, please. If you have read The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, then this is the next Chilean book you need to read. Full stop. It's not because they are necessarily similar, although both deal with the dictatorship. It's just that those are the two books that you should read if you're going to read Chilean literature. That's all I'm saying. I feel like I've been filming for a very long time because I have. I am going to pull out another jar book. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will link down below my February jar video, my January jar video too, because that is where I explain everything. Oh, these were the music books, and I got how to listen to jazz, and I'm going to take it because I just got AirPods. It's been really comfortable for me to just listen to music at night while I read. So I think it will be really nice to be listening to the jazz he recommends while reading the book, which was what I was doing when I first started reading this book, and then I stopped. I tell the whole story in my February TBR jar video. Okay, that's it. It was such a roller coaster of a video, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up, please subscribe and comment. Have you read any of these books, and are you planning on reading any of these books in the future because I talked about them or just because they seem like good books beforehand? By the way, some of these have written reviews. I haven't talked about the written reviews that I've been doing because I'm going to do a special thing for that later on, but they are up if you want to check them out. So I will link them down below. These for The Colossus of New York, Feminine Gospels, If Cats Disappeared from the World, and Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively. So these 4 have reviews, and I will link each of them down below. So yeah, that's it. See you next time. But some other things I like, so it's never mind. This was not my mood before I started talking about Kafka on the Shore. Just let me tell you that. Others